okay, what data do you have? Do you have an overall company level? Do you have the overall big brand but no products? What exists? But here's where you can actually see more opportunity. We can't just be data cowboys and cowgirls anymore.
And it is true.
On the one hand, it was a good thing because it led to a very long runway to develop amazing skills as an analyst.
Right.
Maybe I shouldn't admit this, but I will.
Yeah.
On. Okay.
Welcome, Kudzayi Chakahwata. Is that how I would pronounce it?
Yeah,
Okay.
Bang on. Well done.
It's a relief, I'll be honest. And we really want to thank you for coming today. This is the first in a series of podcasts that we're doing. And having insight from someone such as yourself is really what we're looking for. We'd love to just go through your history and
Sure.
talk about, the things that you've done and what led to you making the decisions to do what you've done. Okay, you're a mathematician by trade, is that right?
Yes, that is right.
And what did you do as a mathematician, as in at school and so on?
Oh my gosh, it was very bizarre. I knew from an incredibly young age that I just had a natural inclination towards, it was numbers at the time, but
Okay.
later learned, of course, it wasn't really a numbers thing. Yeah, it was a distinct occasion. I was probably about 5 years old and hadn't really been taught to count, to my knowledge. And there was a girl who was about 7 sitting next to me, and there was a textbook, and she was counting birds and had to count another set of birds and write the difference. And I just told her the answer very quickly out of nowhere, and she was struggling. And then I just thought, that was bizarre. It kind of struck with me. And since then, I've just had an inclination towards mathematics, and which has never quite let go, all the way to MSc level, which was probably a bit of a character building experience.
Okay.
I may not repeat that if I had another go at life, but got through it.
And you did that at King's, right?
Yes.
And that was a slightly life-altering experience.
Yes,
for you,
yes,
was it?
yes,
Did
it was.
Point you further towards getting into mathematics or deeper into mathematics, or did it steer you into looking for something maybe less?
Let's say after completing an MSc in maths at King's, I don't want to see a classroom again.
Okay, good to know.
No, kidding. It was great. I learnt some fascinating concepts and specialised mainly in neural networks on the one hand, and also in very kind of mechanical style of maths, or what would be called mechanics back in the day, in terms of statistical mechanics and kind of path integrals was my thing. Now, if you showed me the stuff, I'd be like, what's this? But back then it made sense to me.
It makes me feel a lot better to know that it's almost everyone then never really follows the path of what they do in college and university, it seems like.
Yeah.
Unless you're a doctor or a lawyer, typically you just end up going down some random path that
Very
is
true.
unexpected. And for you, naturally as a mathematician, you went into marketing, which is, by all intents and purposes, it's a very lean business, it's very systematic, it's very process driven. There's no fluff in marketing. So it was naturally where a mathematician would go, is it?
No, it was a complete and utter accident.
Okay.
After graduating, I spent about a good 18 months trying to find a role.
Okay.
Well, in that time, I was quite active in that I did a load of things. I mean, I had tons of hobbies. I loved dancing, and I also trained as a fitness instructor in that time. So I had an absolute blast. It was amazing. But then the way just marketing and marketing analytics, to be specific, came up was a fluke. Total accident. I was looking for roles, and then I got a phone call out of nowhere from a recruitment consultant from, I don't know if the company still exists now. I think it does, called Spring IT.
Okay.
And she was talking to me about this graduate marketing analytics position with a company called Everything Everywhere. And I just thought, what's
Which people
this?
still wouldn't know if you asked them.
No.
What's Everything Everywhere?
So at the time, it was the merger between
Yeah.
T-Mobile and Orange,
Right.
and they called themselves Everything Everywhere. Then later rebranded to be EE, and then BT bought them to be BTEE as of now. And so that's where I started off doing the marketing analytics for Everything Everywhere, and got to see the launch of EE, which was very exciting.
Yeah, super exciting. And actually, it was the kind of first of its time. It was that amalgamation of networks.
Yeah.
And it was extremely complicated. But at the same token, being in the midst of that must have been kind of an exhilarating
It was
experience.
a lot of fun, and got to witness the first 4G rollout as well.
Wow. Wow. That was
Good
one,
times.
and that was and I guess also you're sitting in a first party data owner.
Yes.
And so that must have been interesting as well, seeing what you had access to.
Yeah, I was spoiled rotten. Yeah. First career in analysis, having access to so much detailed, clean data just at my fingertips. And so on the one hand, it was a good thing because it led to a very long runway to develop amazing skills as an analyst.
Right.
There was no interruption. It wasn't my job to clean the data, to process it, to do any of that. Just to sit down, pull data from the database, tell marketing what they're doing wrong and what they need to do better. And that was the exercise, and work out a way to phrase it to them, to articulate it to them in a way that they can understand it so that they improve the campaigns for the next round. That was it. But on the other hand, it was a spoiling exercise because then I thought every business is like that.
Right.
You just have perfect data, masses of data and access to it to do your job, which is not true.
Absolutely, and you're probably inspiring jealousy even now from a bunch of analysts sitting in companies by saying that it was fine. I just pulled some data and had some insights, and we all lived happily ever after. It was a fantastic time. I was fabulous, and it was bloody good laugh.
Sounds too good to be true.
Yeah,
that's literally what it was like.
Yeah, but then I mean, you transitioned from that, and did you? So you didn't have to like think about platforms and processes behind that at all. You just got to the insights, and did you inform how those insights were surfaced? Did you get involved in that aspect? You did.
Yes.
How was that? You were dealing with lots of different teams and that.
Yeah. I like that the best in terms of although pulling around data at the time it was SAS, which is you get giggles in the room if you say SAS now, but at the time it was the thing. That was great fun, but the part of the role I enjoyed the most was actually putting the information together and telling that story about, actually, this is what happened, this is what worked, this is what didn't, and this is what we need to do next time to try and improve it. And to sort of frame it as a discussion and to get a nice buzz in the room with marketing was something I enjoyed a lot.
For sure.
Yeah.
And it's really, I think, it's very constructive when there's when you get to have that kind of spirit of collaboration where it's not a blame game, because often when you're talking about understanding how processes work and you're discovering together and you can bring people on that journey, it's much easier to get people to collaborate. I think sometimes things get locked into companies where people are not correctly incentivized to collaborate, right? So I'm sure in different environments that you've been in, E has also Everything Everywhere, at the time. Well, I'm sure it's been different in different places and you've had to work very differently in order to get access to things. Yeah. I guess that kind of leads to the transition from being in a first-party data owner to then moving into a more of an agency environment, right?
Yeah.
In your next role, which
Absolutely.
you were briefly. And how was that? I mean, it must have been a bit of a culture shock.
In fact, it was not what you think, because it was very much the same. When I went to Proximity, or at the time they were called Proximity, they're now RAP, I was exclusively on the TV licensing account and was a data analyst there. And it was a very similar role, in fact, because it was a separate account to the rest of the agency. The rest of the agency, you were an analyst and you worked on multiple clients, whereas I went in and we actually had a separate part of the building in a locked sort of kind of rectangular area of the building where only TV licensing account people sat. So it was a different universe in itself, and I was an analyst there, and it was very similar because I had access to a massive database, this time through SAS Base. Every household in the UK got to see them in terms of, that was like an analyst's dream as well. So again, I was being spoiled by seeing wonderfully clean data, and the fundamental role there was to just really analyse all the campaigns that they had, which I wouldn't necessarily call them nice, fun marketing campaigns as they were with EE. These were more about kind of enforcing the cycle of TV licence renewal payments, or for those who didn't have one in the first place, sending more intensified communications to ensure that they are actually paying for a licence if they're watching TV, which would eventually result in inspectors coming to their place if there were signs that they could be watching, but they weren't paying. And one of the highlights there was actually going out with an agent to go around people's houses and to follow them around on the... Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can imagine. I mean, and you're not the tallest person. I stood next to each other earlier briefly. I'm not either, by the way.
I'm 4'11".
As a short person, I feel like I'm not singling anyone out here. Fellow short people. That must have been kind of interesting as well, because there's some upset people in the room.
Oh yeah, there were some hairy moments.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay, it's really interesting that from a data analyst you end up on the road, like going out there and enforcing stuff. How does that happen?
It was just an offer that the company gave everybody that, you can go out with one of our, I can't remember exactly what they're called. I know I'm calling them agents, probably the wrong term, the inspectors. You can have a trip out with them just to experience what happens. And as a result of our full campaign cycle, if people still haven't paid and they remain unlicensed, this is what happens.
Yeah.
And I got to see that, and it was eye-opening.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
I bet. And, not always necessarily the people you would expect either, I imagine, that don't pay their bills. Like, it's probably quite a broad spectrum in terms of demography.
To be politically incorrect, you'd be surprised at the amount of quite well-off and rather snuffy individuals who think it's beyond them to pay to watch TV.
Yeah. I definitely get that. It's the same thing with parking tickets in certain parts of London. People just see it as a cost of the parking, and they get snooty when when someone actually confronts them about it. I've seen it again. I was working with the Westminster Council on a particular project, and part of it was around actually the development of data usage and data flow using connectivity in telco, and how we could essentially help them. And we similarly, we went out on the road just to see how transactions occurred and actually what the process was. It was much easier for us to then understand how we would use cell tower distribution to actually monitor that. And people really treat people whose job it is just to get people to pay for things they should pay for really badly.
Yes.
And and there is a certain demography to it as well. But in both those instances, you're working with quite trusted data holders.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that kind of also informs kind of the way you have to treat that data as well, I expect.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Whereas back then, maybe I shouldn't admit this, but I will, there wasn't really much conscious connectivity to compliance. And in terms of myself being an analyst, other teams took care of that,
right,
so to speak. There was a data protection team, there was a governance team, there was some ethical teams. And so we were quite removed from that side. We just assumed that we were assured to be correct in doing what we were doing with the data, which has, as we come to now, that's obviously changed. It's everyone's responsibility to watch out for it. But at the time, it was kind of like, someone else has signed off on this, so we're just analysing now.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, in telcos, they have much greater restriction on how they use data and governance, and even in terms of their customer base and how that relates to their spectrum and all kinds of things it relates to. So they are very hot on it, they have been from the start. In GDPR, they immediately had whole teams set up that were focused on GDPR and how they should interpret it by market. And obviously, as you've probably seen, again, you went agency side, and you've kind of gone back there again, right? And you're working multi-market, and I'm sure that you've seen, like, working with multiple teams in multiple markets around legislation and how to treat data has fundamentally changed, right? Over the course of your career.
Definitely.
And how have you seen that transition happening? Is it an easy task? Are we there? Is there more work to be done?
We're not there by any means. Certainly what I've witnessed is there's a lot more awareness and carefulness from what I've seen in terms of dealing with data. And the kind of nuances and how it varies per market is a challenge I have now, in that in the United States, for example, it's very, very, shall I say liberal? I'll choose the word carefully there and say liberal in terms of what companies keep about customers, what we can see and what we have access to in terms of purchasing data, credit card transactions and everything. It's just open, and you can do some really deep analysis and liberally just dig in. Whereas when you start to come to other countries such as Spain and you go to France and areas within various parts of Europe, it's far more difficult. You can't just grab what you want in terms of data about a set of consumers. It's not that simple at all. And there's a very extensive legal process that has to go through our internal legal teams and the client's legal teams. And there's a lot of sign-offs before we can get quite a few things done, which are quite basic in the media. But it's actually a good thing to see it and to witness it and to be aware of all the people who need to sign off on things. We can't just be cowboys and cowgirls anymore.
And it is true, there was that era of being, data cowboys and cowgirls, to your point.
And that was fun.
it was fun. And, I think, whereas we've gone through this process, so, in digital especially, we got to Article 29. That was kind of the first dipping in the toe around 2013, and then GDPR hit, and I think no one really understood what it meant at the time to have this very unwieldy piece of legislation be rolled out across an entire...
A lot still don't.
entire block, exactly. But then obviously, again, there's the nuance of both language and interpretation. And language is, as we were talking earlier, language is really important. Whether it's the language that stakeholders speak in their by their role or by where they are from, and then how the GDPR, for instance, is interpreted. How do you navigate that consistently? In a role such as yours, right, where you're dealing with governance and multi-markets and trying to get access to data, and there's different data sources and different markets based upon those things. How do you navigate that?
Well, there are many ways. We haven't mastered it by any means.
Right.
It's a matter of having to, on the one hand, acknowledge the individuality of each market and to almost give the local teams who are working in those markets autonomy to advise me, as opposed to trying to place any of my views or direction upon them, seems to work quite well. Whereas at the same time, spotting commonalities that may be the case. Like currently, I do work with some clients who have presence in over 40 countries, for example. And so, of course, I can't necessarily be the single point of kind of compilation for every one of those markets, all their nuances, all their toolings that would be likely separate, and the laws that would be separate, and methods of working. And I can't be that one source of compilation right there. So it's about kind of managing an expectation of setting principles and frameworks that everybody must follow, that can apply to every market, and then they can choose the tools that they use. They can choose the perhaps ways that they work to fit these frameworks, which is dominantly my role now in terms of
it's the development of those frameworks.
Yeah, building those frameworks and spotting where the opportunities are, and to be more kind of work together, and where it's just you've got to be separate and just acknowledging that as well.
And I think, and that's really interesting, the idea of still having to be opportunistic. There's this, again, we were talking about it before, assumptions about what people will have or won't have. So you went from being in, well, actually, so proximity as well. You had this wonderful rich data source, and then you've gone into these other organizations that are far more even third party, or having to deal with third parties to get access to your client's data. How did that alter the way that you had to work, moving from that area into that?
Gosh, it's just completely different. It's been one of the hardest career adaptations I've had to make. Almost as hard as the adaptation from being a hands-on analyst to leading teams, but we'll probably touch on that later. It's the sense of always having the data that you're going to need to answer a question directly. And that's been my life up until almost now. To now thinking, I could answer this question really well for you, but the data just doesn't exist in the market, which is the challenge. So you just have to try to do the very best you can to assess, okay, what data do you have? Do you have an overall company level? Do you have the overall big brand but no products? What exists? And trying to work with the best possible source that you have, as opposed to the perfect source.
Yeah. Well, especially, and actually touching on that, brands, especially where you have multi-brand clients. As opposed to, everything everywhere is quite easy. They have
very easy,
product, they have a customer, and they have a direct line of communication between them for the purposes of what you were doing. Whereas even in measurement of data, let's say it's a a large-scale multi-brand. We don't have to, say the names.
Well, I'm not naming anyone.
Yeah,
I don't
not
want to get
naming
into trouble
any names,
here.
not at all. But they don't have any relationship with their customer at all.
Exactly.
How do you deal with that? Obviously, there are intercedents now, and you have different companies that provide analytics based upon shopping data and so on.
Yeah.
But realistically, all of those brands are shifting to trying to have that relationship with their customers.
Yes. Exactly.
And do you get to be involved in kind of how the infrastructure of that?
Heavily, yes.
Really?
That is, well, I wouldn't say I'm a specialist in that area, but I have been involved in projects to help, let's say, very big clients sort of roll out a first-party data strategy so that they have the ability to be able to speak or to contact their customers directly and to not so much rely on paid media. Well, of course, they're still going to do paid media. It would be a bit weird not to do paid media.
It'd be weird for an agency to advise them not to do paid
Yeah,
media.
right. No, yeah. So keep paid media on. But at the same time, yeah, right. At the same time, also use the channels of a way to speak to your customers and get to know them, build your own kind of database with them. That's a very controversial thing to say, though, because I'm in a position where I can't prove the tangible value behind it.
Yeah.
It's a very much more of a it's an emotional thing nearly. Of course, you've got to know your customers. It's good to have the ability to tap into them at any time that you want. But then there's a whole debate about, well, what is the value add over paid, owned and earned in the traditional way?
Yeah,
and we're struggling to answer that question directly because it's so different for each business.
Yeah.
But I think it's better to invest in it and perhaps not need it. And if you want to be a little bit controversial, you can always, in a compliant manner, monetize that data if you don't need it yourself.
Yeah.
But you didn't hear that from me, as opposed to just not investing it in the first place.
No, it's true. And, I think that it's simple things sometimes for brands that, that again, people don't always understand. So, for instance, for a dishwasher tablet brand, actually, the dishwasher tablet that comes free with the first dishwasher you ever buy can often be the thing that most informs what you buy from there on in, right? And that's a placement, right? That's a product placement. It's a piece of advertising in effect, which, isn't necessarily that easy to measure either. But they know it and they continue to do it, and it's still an important part of their strategy.
Yeah.
Similarly, when people choose the car brand they love, for a boy it's like 14 apparently. And that's the car they know they want to buy it in their 40s. These are things that brands know inherently. How measurable it is, who knows? But
right.
I think that we all instinctively, if you look back to your childhood and then think about the things that you interact with today that you trust as brands, it's probably true of many of the things that we buy.
Yes.
And, and so as such, when you're talking about Coca-Cola versus Pepsi, Coca-Cola, they know that their businesses, primarily there's that group of people that drink five Cokes a day, right? Or whatever it might be.
Good for them. Yeah.
Right, exactly. But then there's those people who drink it every 2 weeks. And all Coca-Cola has to do with their advertising is to get them to drink one more Coke.
Which is very hard to do, by the way.
Right.
Yeah, that's the mistake I see a lot of brands make. That's not the sort of, in most cases, it's not the fundamental likely dynamic of consumers. But with Coke, I suppose that's the exception.
Right.
That is the exception.
I am using that as the exception, to be honest.
Cokes, your Pepsis,
statement.
That's an exception.
Yeah.
But for most, if you're not Coke, if you're not Pepsi, if you're not a huge player in the market, getting your consumers to do a little bit more is the hardest way to get your brand to grow.
Right.
Much harder.
And you would have seen that in Everything Everywhere, obviously, because of those are the types of campaigns you're trying to run.
Yeah.
And so seeing how hard that was from a first-party perspective, has that informed how you inform your clients today as a third party? Has that come a long way?
A lot come to us, and maybe I'm allowed to say certain sweets and confectionery who may not be the biggest players, who reckon that they can try to push their customers to buy their unique product more.
Yeah.
And then my task is often to show them with data that, yes, you could do that, but that's going to be probably a very small proportion of your growth.
Yeah. Well, if you work in a brand, you have to have drunk the Kool-Aid. I guess the question is how much Kool-Aid does an agency need to drink to remain impartial enough to give the right advice?
historically, the question was client says, agency do. But now we're trying to be more challenging in that sense, to actually, in a nice way though. If it's a pitch, by all means, we do as we're told.
Right, of course. That's the best.
But then
Yeah.
what I'm trying to encourage teams to do is answer the brief, yes, but also make suggestions for, this is your brief, we've answered it, but here's where you can actually see more opportunity if you went to these audiences, is something that I'm working on currently now with a potential client who will remain unnamed. And one thing that I would say is, it's been traditional to just answer the question and leave it at that and be almost executionary in the response. And that's for all kind of houses and not just us. And another aspect of my role is to try and push the idea of challenging clients back, of saying, why do you think, not in this way, why do you think you're going to be able to increase your sales by 20 million in this way? Let me show you something. You can only increase by maybe 2.3 max if you do this. You have more chance of 20 million if you increase your budget to here and target these sets of consumers who are buying this competitor's product. And then...
And being the challenger, I guess part of that comes from the fact you are analytically minded.
Exactly.
And you kind of want to cut through the BS, I'm assuming.
Yes.
Sometimes.
But I've learned that approach may not
Yeah.
be the best, the hard approach of cutting through the BS, which worked quite well in tech.
Yes, of course.
When I was
it does.
there, you
They
just
enjoy it.
straight shoot and say, no, don't do this, do this. In media, I found that doesn't work. You have to be a bit more gentle and subtle and kind of lead people slowly.
And as a transition, talking about culture ultimately, aren't we? And in terms of like that cultural shift, that was difficult. Did it take a long time? Have you found because it's not? I'm not just talking about the culture of you. I'm actually talking about the culture of data practitioners, really.
Yeah.
Because it is a data practitioner's. That is by virtue of who they are that they have to cut through the noise.
Yeah.
That's your job. And so therefore your brain is geared that way, and it must be very difficult to navigate in a much more kind of, let's say, a softer, more political climate to both be successful in your task but also successful in your role. And how's that been for you? I mean, apart from the fact that you are a director, a senior person in an agency, so well done. You've definitely done something right.
Thank you.
What's the secret sauce?
Oh, God, there's a lot of questions there. And
I know.
Where shall I start? I would say I'm still making that transition, if I'm honest, between how to calibrate myself in a way that actually resonates with people. It's a constant learning experience in that sense. But I've learned that, I hate to cliche, but less is more a lot of the time. If you go in like a bull and trying to bully people into something, it doesn't work. They cower away and don't want to know and won't pick up anything that you're trying to tell them. But often just dangling carrots in front of them and almost giving a bit of a tease or it depends. People are so different. It's about reading what people want to hear and trying to gear what you're saying to appeal to them. And that'll be so different for each individual person. And sometimes it helps me to almost give a method as an option of what they could apply to answer a brief and almost use their own tricks against them, like in advertising, like presenting my methodology suggestions or improvements for performance suggestions as though I'm advertising to them, like calling buzzwords around the deck and using this method. This is your upgrade. If you want to upgrade your methodology, this is an option, by the way. And then they get excited and think, I don't want to do the basic method. I want to do the more sophisticated method. And then, so those sorts of things, those tricks, psychological tricks you can use from being in advertising and hearing all the creative meetings, I've sort of picked up on some things and started to use those in my decks to try and almost psychologically manipulate people into doing what they otherwise wouldn't perhaps do because it's too many numbers.
Well, that is advertising, right? So advertising has informed how you promote what you do. And I think it's probably not an unuseful skill to develop, right? I mean, it has broad application.
It does.
In whatever you might choose to do going forward. And in terms of that, language adoption, how easy is it to bring others on the journey to adopt more of your language, I guess? Because you've kind of talked about one side, which is you've taken on language. How much of your time is spent in education?
Oh, I'd say most of my time is now spent in education. is it fair to say most? Well, at least 50%, I would say. And that's even harder, actually. I find when you're in front of local markets or clients who want to learn, well, I find it so funny, want to learn from me. It's like, really? Okay, serious? But yes, that's an easier kind of win than you have fellow technologists who tend to be a bit more stubborn.
Right.
And I'm pointing at myself as well in that.
Of course.
Yeah.
Well, we as technologists, we think that we are more data informed in the decisions we make and in the opinions we have. Therefore, we're much more rock solid. We have a better foundation for our opinions.
Yes,
other people.
right.
There's a certain amount of egocentricity to it.
Oh, huge ego, yes.
But but I think also, it does mean that when we change our minds, I think, when we adopt different practices, that it also is. We are calibrating in a different way, and I think that has value as well, right?
Absolutely.
So, I think, this whole kind of education and journey piece is really important for us as individuals as well, because it, as you said, it's informed you're bringing advertising into the way you promote yourself. But, I kind of go back to this question of educating other stakeholders, because you're not always just talking to other insights people in the client. Right, but also internally.
Yes.
Planners and buyers, I'm assuming you have many conversations with them. How are you bringing them into the fold of data to help them? Because obviously they're talking as well to their client, and they're relaying things that you're saying. So do you do workshops? Do you do sessions? You do, yeah?
Yes, tick. All of those things, tick and tick.
Okay.
And I'm fortunate in some ways in that what we are trying to say as a team where we sit in trying to bring more connectivity to what the client actually needs to do to improve their business into media planning is what we're trying to do. And it's quite an obvious win for everyone in that more money into Publicis, more money for the clients. And it's just like, well, quite an obvious logical thing to do. So people understand and are often on side with the principles. But the very, very difficult part is that you're often asking people to change the way they work. You're asking them to move away from their comfort tooling and their comfort processes and to do something different. And that's where things get very, very challenging, which is the only thing that I find works is to almost pose the suggestions as minimally disruptive in that if something's going to take you more time and be more of a pain in the arse than it already is, just do what you did. That's straightforward and it's quick. The point isn't that you're doing 100% of everything I'm talking about here in exactly the way.
Right.
But you're just focusing on, we want to drive as much money as possible, if that's the brief, of course. We want to drive as much money as possible for this client, and we're going to make sure that what we're asked to do is actually going to do that. And if it's not, we can challenge it. That's the main thing.
Right.
And it doesn't matter what tools you use and what method you use, but just make sure you're challenging and getting as much as you can out of this campaign such that it drives amazing performance. Not just they say we do it. That's it.
Yeah. It does sound like you quite enjoy being a challenger, I'll be honest.
That's the theme of my analytical life. Kind of upsetting people in marketing has been a regular thing in my past.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, you went from. I'm sorry, I'm going to go right back to the beginning here. What were your parents' expectations, your family's expectations when you did this master's and so on, and you said, I'm going to go into marketing? Was there a response to that? Did they have any expectations of what you would do with that, with your degrees?
At the time, I didn't phrase it that way because I didn't think I was going into marketing.
Oh, okay, yep. Okay.
I thought I didn't even know what I was going into, to be honest. Yeah. I just thought, it's something related to maths. I can do stuff with data and use some, maybe 1% of my mathematical ability in my life. So this sounds interesting, and it's about how people behave and respond to how you're communicating with them. And I like digging into why people do what they do. So in terms of their response, there wasn't really a, oh my God, what are you doing? Or yes, this is great. They were just like, what is this?
You weren't going off to be a dancer, I guess, full time, which is something you did for a period of time.
Well, I was never a professional, just a hobbyist.
As a hobbyist. So I guess it wasn't
they
too
were
far.
a bit worried that was going to be where I go. Even I would have loved that, but the ability wasn't necessarily there. But They weren't just like, what is this analytics stuff? And why can't you be a doctor or lawyer or something? They were just like, oh,
fair enough. It's a
whatever
job.
This,
as
yeah.
well. Yeah, exactly. And
It's a real role, and
Yeah.
she's actually got a real job. And, so great.
yeah, she's going to give up the dancing. That's what we care about.
Didn't give it up, but okay.
So, and I guess, we were talking about language and we were talking about out there. And I think, a natural transition to that is obviously the large language models, which we're not going to dive too deeply into questions about AI. Well, but I imagine that you're getting lots of questions about it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And, you're on the real pointy end of the stick for clients because they're all a bit lost and they're looking at you and they pay you guys fees and they're like, well, you're the data experts. Tell us about this new data thing.
Yeah, that's literally what the story is. And everyone's in the same pot of, I would say, confused soup, really.
Yeah.
And then,
you guys included, right? And we all are something.
Actually, publicists are in a very good position in this sense. But
oh, really?
I'm probably not, I won't delve into that
No.
too much because I may not have don't really have the sign off to perhaps dig into this in much detail.
Yeah.
But we're very fortunate in that from our standpoint, we have access to a lot of kind of internally kind of approved AI tools, which are making our lives super swift
Fantastic.
in terms of work. Clients, on the other hand, it's a bit of a, oh my goodness, that Spider-Man meme where they're all standing together like this.
Yeah.
That's where we kind of are, like, oh my goodness, everybody wants a piece of AI.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the foundation in a lot of businesses needs to be laid before you can think of doing things in a very kind of getting things on in a hyper mode. You have to have the foundation set.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of companies forget that and have forgotten that, in that the foundation isn't even there to do basic modeling, let alone AI coming into the picture.
Yeah. And I mean, do you have to spend a lot, because it comes down to kind of data operations and machine learning operations, everything that's fed into that model. Have you, I imagine that's work you already have to do to some degree in terms of like helping them to get their data in order so that you can do things to it?
Yeah, the company has that offering for sure. And there's some other kind of sub-houses, sub-agencies who specialize in that for clients. Yes, so yeah, we have the expertise.
Yeah, but how, I guess the question is for now though, how are you answering that question for now? Because I guess there's a little bit of wait and see about some of this stuff, right? I'm sorry, what I mean is in relation to marketing.
Yes.
Right. So how is it being used? We know, okay, so people are using it to generate content.
Yes.
Right. That's copy and things like that. But there is a broader issue as it relates to things like copyright and how it's being informed.
Yeah.
So I guess that's the question: is how are you informing them? How are you advising them when they're asking this question? And what are the areas that you're asking them to think about before they start deploying it or asking you to work with it for them?
Yeah, there's so much to it though, because people almost bucket AI as one huge thing that can be defined and pinpointed. Yeah. There's so many applications from the creative to the actual data, and it's endless. Yeah. In terms creatively, though, there are a lot of, let's say, businesses who would like to move away from the idea of having each an individual campaign designed on a sort of tailored basis and to just have like a library of AI-generated assets that just automatically deploy and just have a system that flies on its own that way, which is the dream, which would be quite interesting. But that would be sad, I suppose, to lose a lot of people who do kind of labour of love to get that going, but I'm sure you'll still need people as well. Then obviously there's the data side to it, which I think is really quite cool. I love the idea, and I know this may sound a bit sick, I love the idea of an AI doing analysis.
Right.
I actually do like that, and I think there are quite a few businesses out there, and I'm speaking as myself now, not as someone who works for a company, and there are quite a few businesses out there who have these toolings where they have this impressive AI that you can show it some data and it'll do some analysis.
Yeah.
I'd love to see that being developed.
Yeah.
I'd really love to see that being developed to a point that you only have to kind of vet it as an analyst and sort of look after it and to coach it a bit.
Yeah.
Because a lot of time goes into just retrieving and pulling data and massaging it and twisting it and making charts and figuring out what's going on. And if that can be done by a machine and we just interpret and relay the message, that's going to be a game changer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But,
I mean, again, it's the nuance of the data that goes in, but it's also the prompt engineering that's on the front end, right? When you're talking about conversational AI, especially.
Exactly.
And that's, I think that's going to be the real art and science, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right. And it's really data practitioners and data scientists that are going to be the kind of wielders, I foresee, of that prompt engineering to some degree. If you think about what a data scientist does today, a lot of it is going to be replaced, right, by those large language models, because those LLMs are there to interpret, right? They're through nuance, but they're going to have all of that back end kind of information flowing in, and they can constantly rework decisions. A data scientist speaks the language of the LLM, though, if that makes sense. So having them at the front end to actually deploy those prompts and define those prompts in ways that are relevant to that LLM as an analyst makes sense to me. But I guess the question is, it's that kind of circular, that snake eating itself, right? And that's some of my concerns about how we use this. And we talked about this, like the information that goes into the model.
Yes.
And as we have, the conspiring kind of additional data privacy, acts coming into place, and increasing restrictions around access. How do you make better decisions with less data? I guess
that's the thing. You're kind of screwed if you do, screwed if you don't. To get an amazing LLM of the future, you need to kind of almost not care about compliance and put everything in it.
Yeah.
But then that's not legal, that's not ethical. So you only can process those who consent to it, which means you have a subset immediately. You're introducing bias from the start.
Yeah.
And so it's a really tough, it's just tough. I don't know how things are going to land.
Yeah.
But I suppose my standpoint is just heavily lean into AI, experiment with it if in a company, and do whatever you have to do, use whatever you have to use to make your lives easier. But make sure, this made me cringe when it first came in. You don't have a team of technologists who are using the kind of just open source, non-API'd AI tooling and putting sensitive information in it. And just make sure that's not happening. And have your in-house solutions that are secure and are protected, and just have employees use every single one of it to their benefit. Because I haven't drafted an email from scratch for months now.
Wow.
The time that it has saved is ridiculous.
That's really interesting.
Just write a few very, very incredibly messy, clumsily worded emails, give it to an AI, and then I just say what I want. Can you make this sound professional? A little bit of humor, friendly, and then
that's your prompt
get
engineering,
it right.
right there. Yeah. And you do develop a relationship with that AI as a result, though. It does learn and you're like, this sounds frighteningly like me at this point. Am I even needed in this transaction? Maybe it can just take. I'll go on holiday. I'm joking, but
no, seriously, that I see.
Yeah.
I hope that would be the real thing.
Yeah,
we can just take a week and AI is doing all of this stuff, and while we're on the beach somewhere.
But to your point, there's a whole ecosystem that's developing, right?
Yeah,
and that's really interesting. However,
yes.
When you look at things like, so LangChain's a great example, right? Which is an LLM that's used. You can develop your own apps. But the problem is that the training model that it uses, you have to adapt very specifically to your own business's needs. And if you're not trained in machine learning and data science, that can become a very clumsy beast.
Yes.
And actually, the outputs can be really can be very varied, let's say, in terms of quality. So, and then on the other side, within say, within Copilot, they are offering. So all of the copyright infringement is taken under the hat of Microsoft's own copyright rights. So they remove all risk. Now, if you're a large-scale company, I just don't see the choice. There isn't a choice. You have to go with Microsoft, right? Because you require those protections. So as much as you're seeing like this development of an ecosystem in that area, I know we've talked more about AI than I intended, and I apologise for that. but it must be some view that it's going to become much like everything else. It's going to consolidate quite heavily and probably faster, I think, than other industries. Would you agree or not?
I hope so, is where I stand. I've seen a lot of, let's say, buzz trends come up in tech over the last over 10 years, which never materialised.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping this one with AI actually does embed itself and absolutely land.
Yeah.
I just have that hope.
Yeah, and I don't think consolidation, given that the power of these tools, is necessarily a bad thing. I think having kind of wild AIs roaming the internet and making decisions and pretending to be people is probably quite a frightening
That
thing.
is very frightening. There is a dark side to it, and I know I sound all enthusiastic, like yeah, bring it on. But I'm very aware that there is an incredibly dark side that could potentially arise as well.
So I guess the question is on all of that, though, because you talked about kind of the development of language and direction of travel of data, is like, where do you see your role going, in the next kind of five years? I won't say 5 to 10, because that's, God knows. Remember 10 years back?
Well, yeah.
So 3 to 5 years even.
Genuinely. And people think I'm kidding when I say this, but I mean it. I thought my role, or roles like mine right now, if you asked me 7 or 8 years ago, I would have thought they would be obsolete.
Yeah.
I'd have thought we would have been automated out of organisations by now.
Sure.
And I'm surprised we haven't been. And I know that's an awkward and fairly awful thing to say, but I thought things would move with the momentum that the perception was at the time.
Yeah.
To be that the idea of someone sitting in front of a database, for example, and pulling out results would just, that's just Neanderthal-esque behaviour in 2024. But it's not.
No.
Businesses are still struggling with that as their foundation. Mm-hmm. And so this is why when people ask, where do I think things will go? I've got this kind of skepticism about me that I think we'll be in the same spot, in that there'll be some other hot thing that's maybe like AI or not exactly AI that comes up and is the next wave that everyone's buzzing about. And then AI becomes the next kind of machine learning, which kind of was a buzz but took off in a kind of small way, but then landed again very shortly afterwards, and then didn't quite materialize in the way that a lot of companies needed it to or said it would.
Yeah, I think
that
innovation.
was rather negative.
no, but actually, I think that increasingly so. Though I think like innovation dips into the banal much more quickly than it ever has.
Yeah.
Right? If you think about electric cars and how exciting it was even 3 years ago, and now it's like. It's an electric car, all right?
Like,
right. Our interest in the next phone that comes out is now like waned to near indifference when a new iPhone comes out. It's a new iPhone, which like what was the last? What number is it now?
Totally forgotten.
To no idea.
Don't care anymore.
So they do. They go into banality, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? And the other, I guess the other thing on that is, I guess for you especially, we always we have a tendency to build a product of one, but we also, that tends to be our view of the world as well. We always look at it from inside the bubble, right?
Yes.
So why isn't everyone getting this? And that comes back to that language and taking people on a journey again, and how you transition and bring people on that journey, so you're not just coming like a bull in a shiny shop going, who's made all this mess? Like, oh, it was
absolutely.
me.
Yeah.
And I guess so when we talk about what's next in data and analytics, and for a role such as yours, I think that you're probably right. There's obviously always a need, especially on the decision end, regardless of LLMs, that the decisions will still be in the hands of people.
Yeah.
And so, again, I think you'll be this. It sounds like there's, especially when you're talking about the AI, that you'll kind of be this interpreter. Maybe, is that something?
Yeah, a sort of, shall I say, a guardian?
Yeah, a guardian.
Yeah, that's how I'd love to see it. That you probably need maybe not less people, but more people, new roles to act as these guardians of these machines or these models, and to just ensure to our power that they stay within the parameters, that they learn within the parameters. And But then, of course, my sick-minded sci-fi side of me would like to see them take over in some sense. That would be lovely. That would be exciting.
But people worried about that in agencies with programmatic, right? They thought that they thought the robots were going to take over when they could buy ads automatically. But we still have account directors and and planners and buyers, and no one's actually been replaced in that whole value chain. I don't think. In fact, there's more people. Agencies are bigger. Despite the fact
we need more.
Yeah,
we now need an AI team. We've had people.
And you're hiring for that?
We actually do already have one.
Oh, okay, well done.
Who specialise in it and who handle a lot of the big questions around it.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Well, it sounds like you guys are done. You're ready.
It's exciting.
Yeah, of course.
We're still all learning and need to sit with these individuals such that we can sit in front of clients knowledgeably. And so that's our kind of aim for the next few weeks, to just extract from their brains, like, okay, so what do you do? What's the offering? How do we phrase it? What's the parameters?
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. And it's nice to kind of go through a period of discovery yourself again, right?
Yeah.
And be informed by new things.
And ride the wave. And I don't think it's a good thing I don't think it's a bad thing, rather, in tech, how so many waves just come in and peak and then go and the next thing comes. I think that makes it quite exciting.
Yeah.
Because people adopt what resonates with them and don't what doesn't. And it's great. I look forward to the next one.
Yeah. And when we talk about readiness, I think, again, we always think about that 1%. And what I mean by that is, we see these really successful businesses, whether it's Salesforce, in CRM, or if it's a data platform. We're like, wow, they're worth billions and billions of dollars. But those billions and billions of dollars aren't actually based upon that many companies or people. You can get to, you can be $1 billion company on the back of 50,000 customers, right? In technology.
Right, yeah.
But we see the size of them, we're like, wow, surely everyone's like taking up these things. But to your point, I think that's not true, is it?
No.
Yeah, we find ourselves...
You'll be shocked as very, very successful businesses are passing around Excel spreadsheets. You'll be surprised.
Yeah.
Not that Excel is bad. I love Excel, but it's not a database.
No, it's not. I had a company that I was rebuilding a platform and creating an end-to-end kind of system for, and this was a company that had lots and lots of personal data. I mean, financial data on consumers.
Yikes.
And it existed across 40 Google sheets that the whole company could write to and edit. And that came in.
You're giving me a horrible. Can see that going so wrong.
Everything was. There's this great meme I like that's in Ghostbusters 2, and there's this the guy, he's got this fuzzy hair and he's going through this. He's in this museum and he's going, everything you are doing is bad. I want you to know this. And it's like, it's exactly. You come in sometimes, but you can't say it. You've got to, guys. I think
not right away.
Probably just put down our pens and pencils. Maybe have a think. And have you been in any of those kind of disaster moments, like where you've seen something really like, oh my God, happening with clients naming no names?
Unfortunately, I say unfortunately not.
Oh.
Well, because the human condition, the part of our brain that always looks when we drive past an accident. I hate myself for saying that. I would have liked to say that I've witnessed a disastrous breach in my time.
Yeah.
I haven't. I've kind of heard of them happen in companies that I was about to join.
Okay.
And I won't mention them along the way.
Yeah.
And I've heard them happen in companies that I had left, but I had never witnessed kind of the outpour of that happen. But
Yeah. Well, you're lucky, unlucky,
Yeah,
depending
I
on your
know.
perspective, I guess.
But having said that, there's a very good training in every company I've been with analysts and data teams to know what to do if you see something, who to contact,
See something,
who to
say
escalate.
something.
Yes, who to escalate to, who to email, and who needs to be notified.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, I've never seen the chain that leads to that actually operate.
Good.
Damn.
No disaster.
Yeah.
Nothing to see here. I'm
Yeah.
sorry about that. Well, I think it's been really nice having you talk to us. I'm not sure we'll cut this and wrap it up.
Yeah.
But I was just saying, are we good for content? We could keep wrapping.
You've covered it all. If you want to carry on, we've got. I don't know what your time's like, but we have.
We could have a little break and then go.
Yeah.
And
Do
do you
that.
want to have a break?
Sounds really good.
Yeah, because we did. We ran through actually. I think we
Yeah.
did. I think we did what.
You may want to shave the eye bit.